Hi everyone, my name is Roger Tomhave, and if you are watching this PowerPoint presentation, I know that many of you know me, but in case you don't, I have just retired after 10 years of being a professor at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Prior to that, I was 19 years in Fairfax County Public Schools, first as the visual arts supervisor and then as the fine arts coordinator. But for this particular presentation, in maximizing secondary students in their online art education coursework, I hearken back to my early career, where for 11 years I was the secondary art teacher, middle school and high school, on the White Earth Indian Reservation of northwestern Minnesota. So I'll be bringing to bear a lot of that experience as I go forward. So last semester I found myself, as many of you have, coming up with a very quick plan for teaching online for the second half of the semester. So we went away on spring break, COVID happened, and by the time we came back for spring break, the world was a mess. And what we decided to do was first extend spring break for a week, but when we came back, it was with online teaching. So, of course, like you, like all of us, I wondered how I would teach. How could I be an effective instructor in an online environment? But once I got over the initial fear of my own failure, I began to consider how my students would best learn in an online environment. I decided to focus on what I thought I might do in an online environment for the middle schoolers that I had taught or the high schoolers that I had taught, and use these choices to teach my James Madison University Middle School Methods art teacher candidates. Though I didn't tell them that I would be instructing them using the methods that I would have used with my own former middle school students, it was easy to guess from the way that the semester progressed. My students at the college level had much more reading and responses in writing than any of my middle school students ever had. And the assignments were different, but my methodology was the same. And then, about 3 weeks into the online experiment, I found an online article from Columbia University's School of Engineering entitled 10 Tips for Effective Online Learning. It was written to assist college students with being more successful in their online coursework, but it also reinforced the choices that I had made for my own online teaching. Plus, I believe it is important for teachers to model the behaviors they expect of their students. So in this session, I have organized my own methodology for online instruction, or what I share with you, around these 10 tips. So in order to manage my own time and my students' time effectively, I decided not to change the schedule at all. I knew how important it was for my middle school students and my high school students to be very regular, to keep a routine. And so I decided that we would keep our same class routine. And this particular class that I'm referring to, we met Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1:30 p.m. So online instruction happened for me Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1:30. Now I will say that the ending time varied based on what was happening during a particular day. Sometimes my presentation was front-end heavy loaded, or student presentations. I had multiple student presentations that would take us right to the end of class. But other times there was lead up to what might be happening in terms of student offline work. And so my advice to you is be flexible on the ending time. But also be prepared. I prepared for each class as if I were meeting the students in person. I got dressed, pants and everything, and was over-prepared as I would usually be, as you all are. And I also prepared the space from which I would be seen and the background I would want my students to see once they logged on. Now, James Madison University had a contract with WebEx for online teaching, but I've also used Zoom, and it works in much the same way. So outside of class, I set a specific time segment to dedicate to the preparation of the class, just like we're recommending for the students to do with their outside work. Set aside a specific time. So during this study time or project work, I use the same mentality to try and eliminate distractions like we recommend for our students during their own work time, such as email, web browsing, social media, and TV. So trying to eliminate all of those things for my own preparation for online instruction. One of the best ways to learn at home efficiently is to have a productive space that eliminates distractions. If your study area is the family living room in front of the TV, you may find it very challenging to focus. The same goes for teaching. You ought to set aside a space that you're not going to be distracted or disturbed. It might take some creativity, but try to make a space in your home that is used exclusively for attending virtual class or working on class projects or assignments or presenting to the class. And using headphones during class time can also help you to stay focused and tune out other noises that might be distracting. But set aside a space. Now, I also want to mention, as you see in the points here, that with my class, and I recommend this with your class, that you have also current, often, passive interaction. And that's the interaction that you can get from online assignments in Blackboard, the way that you can comment on students' work that they turn in, the way that you can edit or grade the work, give them feedback in Blackboard, Canvas, Google Docs, however you have previously worked with your students online, and a place for them to submit their work and for you to see it and to share it with the class. But then there's also the direct interaction, whether that's WebEx, Zoom, Google. So pay attention to your setup and to your preparation. I would say that my screen is probably an organized mess when I was teaching my class, because on the one hand, I've got my WebEx or Zoom live going where I can see, and I like the view where I could see all the students at one time, which I called my Hollywood Squares view. You know, I saw all of the students. So I could see their reactions. I could see what they were looking at, if they were looking at me or so I also had the chat open, and so they were able to share comments with me. More about that later. But I wasn't typically writing in that myself as I was presenting, but I could see what they were posting. So I've got that open. I've got my PowerPoint open if I'm doing a presentation, or maybe some videos from YouTube or examples that I'm showcasing. So at a moment's notice, I'm ready to share my screen and go directly from one piece of instruction to another piece of instruction. So I can tell you that the ease of transitions are very important when you're teaching online. Students don't have all of the other visual distractions of your classroom or classmates. They just have your screen, and whatever is going on or not going on your screen is what they see. So preparation and creating the learning environment that is prepared to go through the entire class session, I think is really critical. Another important aspect of teaching online is taking frequent breaks. This was a recommendation that Columbia University was saying for student study times at home. But I think it's important in online operation as well. So in the case of this PowerPoint, for example, you can pause it at any time and take a break. But I think it's important for you as the teacher to take breaks. I taught a 90-minute plus course with my students, and I know many of you teach 90-minute courses. But I don't recommend that any of you stay online with your students for 90 minutes at a time. So there is many ways to take breaks and reasons for taking breaks, as I mentioned here. Breaks for independent thinking. What a great opportunity to take a pause and have students think. Maybe they're responding in the text message, but just to take a break, a bathroom break, where everyone just simply pauses their audio, pauses their video, but with specific directions for the time that we're coming back. We're coming back directly at 2 p.m. And then I will expect everyone to be back with their video feed and their audio feedback on. But also taking breaks in the class for work time, independent work time, but with the idea that that's going to be productive work time because we're coming back. I'm going to check in with them during our time. So might be subgroup breakout time for brainstorming discussion. So there is also methods and ways of using subgroups within all kinds of online software packages. So I recommend you check into that, but also doing group work in a after a break, in addition to a break. So break it up. Break up your class, as you know is the right thing to do in a 90-minute block or in a lengthy time. Students are not going to want to watch your screen in your class for that length of time. Ask for help. If you need help during or outside of class, just ask for it. The benefit of a virtual classroom environment is that you still have access to your instructional team who is dedicated to your success. They're there to assist and encourage you on your educational journey during class times, and often through the chat or through email, of course. But I think for instructors, for teachers, teacher to teacher, teacher to administrator, student assistants, doing demonstrations, presenting, peer-to-peer kind of assistance that your students, I actually recommended for my students that they text with each other prior to class, reminding each other of what's due, but becoming a class unit, a group unit. So, but also teacher to parent. Stay accountability conscious. So, publish your due dates. Make sure that the students are clear on when all of the assignments are due. Of course, that's easy to do in Blackboard and Canvas. They'll get notifications on due dates, as will you. You'll get notifications when things have been posted up and you can respond to them. But with all that being said, you know that you must have backup plans for students who can't see that or on a day-to-day basis do not have access. So there were 2 of my students that had iffy Wi-Fi, and one of my students who was expected to present, as Murphy's Law would have it, on the day that she was to present, an electrical storm took her out of the picture completely. So eventually she was able to text me and tell me what happened. But in the meantime, I had to punt with the rest of my preparations for class and move her presentation to when she was back and online. So, but creating with your class a team environment of support. You're all in this new environment together, and it's a team effort to make it all work effectively. So for the benefit of your students and for their learning, to be clear with your expectations. And then to make it clear when you've had to make adaptations. And I think it's important to give them the rationales and the reasons for that too. So take advantage of the video chat aspect. You know, one of the things that I like best about that is I could be presenting and I could ask questions and ask the students to post up responses to those questions. And then I don't have to pay attention to them right then, but the student gets their response out while they're thinking about it in the chat. And then I can pay attention to their responses afterwards and comment on them. So whether it's student posted comments and questions that they're posting up during presentations or demonstrations that you don't want to address them right now, you're in the midst of presentation that perhaps you'd like to loop for them later. So you don't want to address those questions now, but you do want to address them at the end. And so the students get them down and up and posted in the chat while you're presenting or demonstrating, and then you're ready to respond when you've completed the demonstration. And that might cause you to do a review of some of the demonstration or presentation aspects. But also peer-to-peer comments and questions, how the students can help each other out. And then individual responses to pose questions. Let's say I pose a question and I'm requiring all students to post up in the chat, making sure that I am collecting that evidence then of student communication. And I'm saving that evidence because you can save the chat at the end of each one of your sessions. Collaborate with your peers. So student interactive work groups I found worked really well. And I typically would use a cooperative learning subgroup with my teacher candidates, and that worked really well. But I got that from my middle school teaching. So I divided my cooperative groups into 4 students in each group. And so I had a leader who I could depend upon to stick with that new open group. And if they had trouble, how to contact me and reestablish that group. But also someone who was taking the notes for the group while they were discussing. And then selecting someone who was going to report back when we came back to the full group again of the total class. And then a timekeeper, watching the time, making sure everyone got an opportunity to speak. So I really liked the cooperative learning aspect of everyone having a role during subgroup and breakout sessions. So, and then one-on-one tutoring where they can work with each other one-on-one, your students can, or you can work with one student. Perhaps during a work session for the rest of the class, you ask one of your students to stay online in the main session with you, or maybe a group of students who are struggling to stay online as that breakout is beginning. Also, study groups, the importance of study groups, and the importance of social interaction. Remember, now you're not in class together, and the students are not getting the same degree of social interaction. So more about that when I talk about the way that I open the class, but you're also providing an avenue for them to get together with their classmates and with your team that you've established. Acknowledge accomplishments. I mean, you'll discover there's plenty to celebrate about learning, whether in person or online. So I think it's really important in the online environment to celebrate success. So between classes, they have turned in things to Canvas or Blackboard or wherever their site is, that Artsonia or wherever you are collecting their work. And so you've had a chance to see it. You've had a chance to review it. You know what you need to now emphasize, perhaps when you come back online again. But you also know what successes have happened. So celebrate those successes and point them out, and raise the bar for your students as you are able to come back with them again. So the students can present their work in relationship to their challenges and specific learning criteria. I really like the aspect of requiring my students to do demonstrations and also to present on artists or on particular works or on particular ideas. So those student presentations, you all know that when a student actually has to demonstrate to another student or to the class, when they have to present to another student or to the class, they can own that information. It becomes theirs, and they will learn it and know it better. So take advantage of the comments in your work repositories, whether that's Blackboard or Canvas or Artsonia or all of the places where you can comment back to them individually about their work. Students will appreciate that. And then make sure that you're keeping up with your online grading and posting of those grades and acknowledging those accomplishments. I have to say that I've taken a lot of time in self-reflection, putting together this PowerPoint, but also in working with my students. I think it's really important to take time out for self-reflection for yourself as an instructor before you come back to respond. I think that teaching online gives us the perfect opportunity in taking timely breaks to have ample time for student reflection, individual reflection. And so you can give them guided challenges for their artwork, and you can give them all kinds of information and great leading questions. But if you're not giving them a chance to ponder those, I mean, that's a good time for a think break and self-reflection for your students. And it gives them time, or you need to give them time, I should say, in order, after you address a tough, challenging question, to give them time to respond in chat, for example. So they're posting up individual responses to your challenging questions, and you put those in the chat, or they post them up in the chat. Give them time. Is this 5 minutes? Is that going to be enough? 3 minutes? Maybe it's really something challenging and you want them to be very thoughtful about it. Maybe it's more than 5 minutes. But I think it's really important in your instruction too, to take stock of your accomplishments and where you've been. And always keep in focus and in mind where you're going, and staying in the mode of seeing the big picture, like we do as art educators. You know, seeing the forest for the trees. Where are we headed from here? Why am I doing this? What do I want my students to know? What do I want them to be able to do? And then what evidence is there that I can accept as their teacher, their instructor, that they know it and can do it? Will it show up in the chat? Will it show up in the work that they post online? Will it show up in what they say in the discussion in the large group? You all know the many ways that that evidence comes to us. So be patient with yourself on this journey online and teaching online. I know we wouldn't do this by choice. It's not my choice to do an art class online. But I think it's important that you're patient with yourself, that you're able to be flexible, able to be open-minded. And then when things go awry, like what will happen when your students can't attend? And does the punishment fit the crime? Think about the circumstances and what's going on, and all of how life has changed. But stick with both short-term and long-range goals despite everything. Because what we're really after is student learning and focusing on student learning. So I encourage that for you. Rather than thinking about how can I best teach online, I think your best teaching online is going to come when you focus on how your students will best learn. And it's not over until it's over. So keep with your students. Stay with your students all throughout the full year, the semester, however long you might have them, because it might all come together for them only in the end, and being very slow going in the beginning when they're trying to function and work in an environment that they're not used to. So best wishes to you all. And now I'm going to go on to some examples that I used for my class. So an 8th grade online art lesson that I did with my students for my middle school methods class in April was about human body type and pairing together fashion design and images from fashion design, but also images from cartoons and superheroes for an 8th grade class. So here is the itinerary for that class. So I said I would come back to this about the check-in. So there are many ways that you can check in, but this isn't a 90-minute block, so this is a 90-minute itinerary for this particular lesson. But so in the check-in, some students are going to come in very early, depending on when you open the class. I typically opened mine up 15 minutes early, especially if I had student presenters, because I wanted to make sure each one of them knew how to and could share their own screens with me and with the class. So sharing of screens, making sure they've got all of their things, you might want to meet with those students a little bit early before class. But then some students may come on a little bit late, depending on what's going on at home. Typically, if they're late, for me, it was basically because they were struggling with their getting online. So you might have a posted sketch challenge in relationship to the class for the day. That might be your routine. You've done it in class. Your students are used to it. On you go. I liked using it as a check-in time, and many of my students came on early just to be able to check in with each other and with me and to find out how others were doing. So I used the time that way until everyone was on board. I'd greeted everyone, and then I don't know about what you'll be able to do, but I was able to adjust my time then based on when I had all the students. And I really asked them to let me know if any way possible, if they were not going to be able to make it or be a part of that class and that discussion that day. Now, then I spent 15 to 20 minutes in my presentation and discussion what it is that I had to do. Many times that was also during my classes a student presentation time. Maybe it was a discussion first about readings and then a student presentation. But I always had some kind of offline individual student work. That might have been built into their think time throughout the class. In this case, it's actual work time, like you might be doing with a middle school class, which this lesson is designed for. But then, coming back to the online set with accomplished work that you're checking that day. So 20 to 30 minutes at the end with student presentations, discussion about next steps and where we're going next, and giving feedback on what the students have produced during their offline time, their individual time. All part of the class, however, during the 90-minute block. So I'm going to go quickly through this part, but this is, we were talking about with the 8th grade group that I was working with, and these were the Valley Scholars, students who would typically not go to college. And so they were encouraged by James Madison University and by their school systems, selected maybe lower socioeconomic students, first generation students if they were to make it to college. So they're 8th graders. But this was intended for them, and so we're talking about body image, and we're talking about proportions in the drawing and image making world of the human form, of course. So talking about all of that, but then talking about in the fashion industry how figures are elongated, unrealistically, impossibly elongated to make the figures look more elegant, to make the garb that they're wearing look more elongated and more elegant. So we do discussions about that, and how in the fashion industry, the fashion croquis idea is that the figure is 10 heads high rather than 7.5 or so heads high for the normal human form. So we're talking about the fashion industry as opposed to normal human form, and how difficult it is to, especially for middle school students whose bodies are changing every day, who are trying to get control of their motor function, for the size of the body that they're growing into, but inundated with a media world and toys, and as in this case with Barbie, of a world that exemplifies unrealistic expectations for our body form. So all kinds of examples that I give to them from the fashion industry, but also from comics and superheroes. So not going to spend more time on that, but here's what the students are going to do in their offline, maybe 30 to 45 minutes in this case. Choose the template that you think would work best from all those that were shown. Some very non-representational of very elongated human forms, but some that are very human form-like, both male and female. So they can just simply select from one of those templates, or they can completely make up their superhero in their own fashion. But they decide on a superhero template or a body form that they want to use for their superhero. And then decide what aspects, what are the superpowers that their superhero will have. Maybe especially in our current COVID environment, in our current ever-changing world that maybe will never be the same. What superpowers would they wish for themselves or for others in such a world? And then design the costume that they're going to overlay on that template or on their own figure that best fits that superhero's name and superpowers that they are attributing to their superhero. Select the colors for the costume and the best match for that overall design, the name, the superpowers. And then when they come back, so you can see why they might need to simply pick a template for this lesson, and especially for my case, I was working with non-art students, so I didn't know any kind of history that they may or may not have had with art. They were simply coming to the art studio to learn more about James Madison University. And if they were successful through their career, they would get a scholarship, basically a free scholarship ride to James Madison University. So it was a good deal for them, and it's a whole success story in its own right. Story for another time, but it was huge. But anyway, when they come back, they are going to show me what they have created so far. And we talk about them and the aspects of their superheroes and why they picked the superpowers that they did, but also why they picked the body type that they did. All right, one more example, and you'll see that it has a similar itinerary. But we had artist Rebecca Kamen come to James Madison University, and she had a retrospective kind of exhibition in our gallery space, and it was great to have Rebecca on board. But so she, while she was with our students, she was making the case. This is an image from her exhibition. And again, I won't spend a lot of time on Rebecca Kamen and her work, which I would if I was doing this with the students. But here's pieces from her exhibition and the artwork that she showcased and that we had access to. But what she was doing in the presentation to the art education students was she was making the case that the general population, their image of the way that the world works or doesn't work is usually based on the images presented to them from artists. Probably inventors too, but artists who help them picture the macro world, as in the entire universe, or the micro world of atoms and molecules that we can't really see. Artists help us to picture what we can't see in ways that make sense to us. And so Rebecca was making a very strong case that throughout history, it has been the artists that have driven changes in consciousness about the way we see the world. Because we can now see it the way the artist has presented it to us, a certain theory, a certain new thought about the world around us. So I'm showing you lots of examples here very quickly of throughout history, artists who have changed our thinking, inventors who have changed our thinking, but they've done it with these images and presentations of their theories. And she gave one really good example about where she was working with Professor Scott Hughes in the Department of Physics at MIT in Massachusetts. So in this aspect, he was working with the idea of black holes. But as Rebecca was following his work, what she heard him say is that his work on black holes is that they were kind of like sonic waves, and that there was actually emissions from them. And so Rebecca made these mock-up sculptures that she had sent to Professor Scott Hughes, and that began a collaboration, a synthesis of ideas of artists and scientists that changed the way that Professor Scott Hughes thought about his own representation of how black holes function, and that they really do emit. They emit not sound waves, not light waves, but there is an emission from black holes in orbit. And it was through Rebecca Kamen that he came to that realization from the artist's perspective. Powerful story about the impact of artists. More example here, and then here's another one of Rebecca Kamen's work. So if you haven't seen her Divining Nature series, I think you ought to look for it. It's where she took the periodic table of elements and represented them in sculptural form. The entire series looks like a forest of snow-covered evergreen trees or flowers. It's a beautiful series, so look for that one. So Again, this is with our Madison Scholars, 8th graders who came to James Madison University. And here's one of my art education students, now an art teacher in Fairfax County, Julia. And she is presenting to the students before we go up to the upstairs to the art education classroom, where they're going to do the lesson that we have prepared for them. So here she is presenting. Here we are in the classroom with 2 of my students who are now presenting the lesson to the students. Well, here's their presentation, and here's Julia again with more students. So what we wanted to give them was the idea of reimagining the world and reimagining stories that could be told. And so we use the case of the constellation Orion. Now, what's interesting about Orion, it has been seen throughout history of human beings on Earth, and reported history and storytelling, but also it can be seen from, it's so large, it's the largest constellation in the night sky, it can be seen from every continent. So throughout history, artists have taken those stars of the constellation Orion and have basically interpreted them from all over the world in the same kind of manner, coming from a period in which it was really about the hunter-gatherer existence, or, warring, survival was really what was important. So here's an example of Orion, of course, the warrior or the hunter, and telling that story. You look at the constellation in the night sky of Orion, and you think hunter, warrior. You think about the survival of the fittest, but also of the hunter-gatherer. But, if you look at these images and how diverse they are, all based on the same set of stars. But this ongoing kind of theme of presenting this story about what's going on and what story needs to be relayed over campfires or told to generation upon generation. As we drill back, though, and simplify, what we find is simply the stars. Now, you can connect the dots, right, like this, and you can get where they would get either a bow and arrow or a sword and shield, or a tunic with a belt and then a scabbard with a blade or a sword or a knife in it that's hanging from that. Yeah, we can get that. We can see it. But we've also heard the stories, right, throughout history. Well, here are simply the stars. And when you look at these stars, you think, if I had no history of knowing about Orion the hunter or about Orion the warrior, is that what I would have come up with? So I asked the students that. And in fact, I challenged the students, or I had my students challenge the students, to simply look at the stars. And as these stars of Orion dance across our night sky, morning sky, as the largest constellation in the universe, I live in a place where it's easy to see them. They may not, but here is their worksheet, because I want them to try several different ideas. And as Orion goes across the night sky, they could do this from any aspect. They could turn this paper sideways. They could, in each kind of sketch idea, they might want to turn the paper. And now what do I see from this direction? What do I see in these stars is the basic question. And the even more important response of the students I'm looking for is, what is it that you would want to tell to all generations to come? Orion isn't going anywhere. Our relationship to these stars has remained very constant throughout the history of humankind. And what story would you want to tell? What would you want to relate to all people on Earth? So this is their worksheet, their chance to practice it. And then I give them the option of either working with dark stars on a white background or white stars, light stars on a dark background. And in fact, I use construction paper. I would use the full sheet 9 by 12 of construction paper, and either use purple or the dark blue or black construction paper. And then I would only give them yellow, white, orange as colors to work with on top of that in order to do any kind of modeling that they were going to do. So they work in their worksheets first, and then in their best solution, they're going to do it on in this final 9 by 12 image with contrasting colored pencils. Here you can see the challenge for the students. What message would they wish to send to all people of the earth and throughout time? What images do you see in the stars that make up the constellation Orion, especially as you move the paper around and move the orientation of the stars in different directions? And then on the practice sheet, we want them to try 4 sketch ideas from 4 different orientations of the paper and integrate their best ideas into a final image. And then name this new constellation that they would like all people of the earth throughout time to see. And lastly, here are the questions for discussion. Again, what message would you wish to send to all the people of the earth and throughout time? What images did you see in the stars that make up the constellation Orion? Why did you make the choices that you made? What were you thinking when you named your constellation? I wish you all the best in a safe and healthy and productive school year in whatever forms it takes. And like the constellation Orion that we wanted our 8th graders to reimagine, we can change our story, can't we? We can change our story to one that works for us now. So I know you'll all be looking for what will work for you now. So best wishes in finding the new you in online instruction, where you're putting your students and their learning first. Thank you very much.